When we think of a circus, what usually comes to mind are clowns, jumpers, and maybe a few animals like lions or elephants. But there was another group that didn't fit into the normal acts: the sideshow freaks. These were people whose unusual bodies or rare conditions pushed them far beyond anything considered normal. With features that defied expectation and lives shaped by spectacle, these performers left a strange but unforgettable imprint on circus history. And in today's video, we'll take a closer look at 15 of the most unique sideshow individuals ever seen. Let's begin this list with number 15, Mildred and Bill Dirks. They met under the big tent, two people who'd spent a lifetime being stared at. Bill Dirks was known as the two-faced man. Frontonasal dysplasia split his nose and left a deep ridge between his eyes, giving the illusion of two faces. Crowds gawked, some recoiled, yet he smiled through it all. Life hadn't been kind. He wasn't allowed in school and was cheated by carnival owners who used his image to sell tickets. But when Mildred came along, everything changed. She performed as the alligator-skinned lady, living with a painful condition called ichthyosis that made her skin crack and scale. Together, they found what most sideshow stories never had: love. They toured hand in hand, supporting each other through every spotlight and stare. Bill once said Mildred made him feel like a person, not an exhibit. After she died in 1968, he kept performing until 1975, carrying her memory with him through every crowd that came to look. Number 14, the Fiji cannibals. Well, you won't believe it, but they were advertised as monsters. However, in reality, they were really just men in grass skirts, posed beside spears and staged fires. In Barnum's America, the Fiji cannibals were sold to audiences as exotic, terrifying savages, evidence of a world far darker than home. Their names were often fake, their backstories made up. But the real Fijian history ran deeper and far more brutal than any sideshow could fabricate. For over 2,000 years, ritual cannibalism was real in Fiji, part of war, religion, and spiritual conquest. Captives were tortured, killed, and cooked in sacred temples. Skulls became cups, bones became jewelry. Flesh was eaten to absorb enemies' power. By the 1800s, missionaries tried to end it, but not without blood. Reverend Thomas Baker, killed and eaten in 1867, was the last of them. Today, the Fijians speak openly about that past, not with pride, but with reverence for what was lost and what changed. The sideshow sold fear. Fiji now tells the truth, with all its weight. Number 13, Tom Ton, the fat boy. They called him Tom Ton, and his smile was as big as the chair that barely held him. Weighing more than 1,600 pounds at his peak, he became one of the most famous fat acts of the early 1900s. But behind the posters and postcards was Theodore Valenzuela, a kind, soft-spoken man from Mexico who just wanted to make a living. The circus gave him that chance, even if it came at a massive price. He'd sit beneath the lights, dressed neatly, greeting visitors who stared in awe and disbelief. The world saw size. His colleagues saw heart. He helped other performers set up shows, shared food, shared laughter, and became family to those who had none. His life ended young in 1926 from heart complications. Yet the image that remains isn't of excess. It's of resilience. Tom Ton reminded the world that everybody, no matter how extraordinary, holds the same thing inside, the simple wish to be seen kindly. Number 12, Francis Benton. Well, back then they called them half and halves, performers split down the middle dressed as both man and woman. But behind the curtain, this wasn't just theater. It was survival. Francis Benton stepped into that spotlight, not to shock, but to blur the line between what people thought they knew and what they feared to question. The male side wore boots, facial hair, and a pressed shirt. The female side sparkled in bangles, heels, and curls. Audiences gasped. Some stared with fascination, others with discomfort they couldn't name. Francie's wasn't always playing a role. Sometimes the body itself carried dual truths. Most half-and-halves were just acting. A few, like Francie's, lived somewhere in the middle. Sideshow culture gave them a space where they weren't mocked. They were paid, protected, and even admired. Outside, they might have been shamed or erased. But inside the tent, for a few minutes each night, Francie's stood whole. Not as half this or half that, but as someone fully seen in both directions. Number 11. Calvin Bird. In 1902, John Dege introduced Calvin as the Horned Man of Central America, claiming he was born after his mother survived a goat attack and nearly got trampled by an elephant. Bird had goat-like horns and tusk-shaped teeth, except none of it was real. He wasn't from Central America, he was from Georgia. The horns were attached to metal studs surgically implanted beneath his scalp, and the tusks were just fitted dentures. His act unraveled in Valdosta when he was arrested for firing a pistol. During the investigation, police discovered the whole thing was staged, including fake silver coins used by his promoters. Still, Calvin wasn't done. He resurfaced in other cities, rebranded as the Wild Man of Africa, asking doctors to remove his implants and claiming he'd been altered without consent. The mystery faded over time, but Calvin's story stuck, a mix of showbiz deception, surgical spectacle, and a sideshow built on illusion. Number 10. Frankie Doran. Francis Doran didn't need spotlights to pull focus. Whether in military costume or bare-chested on stage, his act drew gasps. He was a master sword swallower with nerves of steel and absolute precision. Performing under names like the original Maxine and Frankie Doran, he traveled with major troops throughout the 1940s and beyond. But Doran's story wasn't just about blades, it was about range. He performed with the 101 Ranch Wild West show, entertained troops, and brought in packed houses from Coney Island to New England theaters. His control, discipline, and stage presence made him more than a gimmick. Doran knew exactly how to work a crowd. He could make danger look elegant. People didn't just remember the sword going down, they remembered how calm he looked doing it. His act left just enough fear in the audience to feel real, and just enough trust that he'd walk off stage unharmed. And he always did, until he didn't. He passed in 1979, but the silence he left felt loud. Number 9. The Frog Boy. Otis Jordan didn't walk on stage, he rolled onto it. His body, shaped by arthrogryposis, left him with underdeveloped limbs, but his spirit seemed untouched. Audiences watched as he lit and smoked a cigarette using only his lips. A simple act turned into pure showmanship. He called himself the Frog Boy, laughing along with the crowd because humor softened what they feared to face. Otis earned respect not through pity, but through poise. He spoke intelligently, dressed sharply, and treated the stage as a space of ownership, not exploitation. When sideshows began fading in the 1980s, he kept performing at Coney Island as the Human Cigarette Factory, defying anyone who said he couldn't belong there. Those who met him described him as proud, funny, and profoundly alive. His body might have been small, but his energy filled every tent. Long after the crowd stopped clapping, people still remembered how Otis made disability look like defiance and dignity itself. All right, guys. Now, let's move to number 8. Madame Jane DeVere. Well, Madame Jane didn't sing, dance, or do fancy tricks. She just stood there, gracefully, and let people stare openly. Because the beard on her face wasn't a costume or a gag. It was real, and it was hers. In the Midwest, she was known as the Kentucky Wonder, a woman whose calm presence and flowing facial hair defied every Victorian ideal of what a woman should look like. She married a showman, Captain J.W. Deve, and the two spent their lives traveling with circus outfits like Patterson shows. Jane used different names throughout her career, Madame Crepes, Madame Deve, but her message never changed. She didn't perform oddities. She lived them, unapologetically. She never demanded attention, never acted like a spectacle. Yet audiences remembered her, not because she shocked them, but because she didn't flinch. Jane died in 1912 while still on the road. Her gravestone is plain. But for anyone who saw her, that quiet confidence stayed burned in memory far louder than any marquee ever could. Number 7. The Penguin Girl. Well, Ruth Davis didn't glide across ice in Antarctica, but when she moved, people said she looked like an actual penguin. Her arms and legs were shortened by phocomelia, giving her a rounded, waddling frame that caught the eye before the heart. Under the stage name Mignon, she performed through the 1930s, playing the marimba with astonishing rhythm. Each note sounded like a small rebellion against what others thought she couldn't do. Crowds came expecting shock but left smiling, moved by her charm. She worked at world fairs in New York and Chicago, always dressed in glittering costumes that shimmered under the lights. Off stage, she found love. Twice. Her second husband, Earl Hoppy the Frog Boy Davis, shared her stage and her life. Together they proved that sideshows weren't just curiosities, they were communities. Ruth retired in the 1960s, remembered not as a spectacle, but as someone who made the impossible look joyful and turned difference into something beautifully human. Number 6. Stefan Babrowski. His face was hidden by a mane so thick it looked sculpted from gold. Stefan Babrowski, known to the world as Lionel the Lion-Faced Man, lived with hypertrichosis, a rare condition that covered his entire body with hair. To strangers, he seemed like half man, half lion. But behind the stage name was someone gentle, articulate, and curious. As a kid, he was handed over to a showman who saw profit in his appearance. Under that harsh start, Lionel grew into a performer who handled every gaze with grace. He spoke 5 languages, read philosophy, and captivated audiences across Europe and America, not through shock, but charm. His presence blurred the line between beast and beauty, showing the world how dignity could exist even under exploitation. When he retired in the late 1920s, he quietly returned to Germany. By the time he died in 1932, Lionel had transformed ridicule into reverence, a rare kind of strength few ever master. Number 5. Anna Swan. Anna didn't just grow tall, she grew beyond every expectation. Born in Nova Scotia in 1846, she was already 5 feet tall by age 4. At 10, she was taller than most grown men. She eventually reached nearly 8 feet. But Anna's story isn't just about size, it's about self-respect. When P.T. Barnum brought her to New York as a teenager, she became one of his museum's biggest draws. But she never let herself be reduced to a joke. Audiences were stunned by her poise, intelligence, and kindness. When the museum caught fire in 1865, Anna nearly died. Too large for the exits, she was saved at the last minute. Later, she married Martin Van Buren Bates, another giant, and the two tried to build a quiet life. Their only child, born over 20 pounds, died in infancy. Anna spent her later years out of the spotlight. People remembered her as a marvel, but those who knew her remembered the grace that never asked to be marveled at. Number 4. The Farmer's Fat Family. There's barely a trace left of them. In fact, no one knows their full names. Just a few old photos of 5 people in matching clothes, standing shoulder to shoulder under a striped tent, their size unmistakable. They were known simply as the Farmer's Fat Family, a traveling act of 2 parents and 3 children who performed together in the 1930s and 40s. While most fat acts were solo attractions, this one showed up as a family unit, equal parts novelty and unity. Audiences gawked, whispered, and pointed, but the family kept moving, setting up for the next crowd, standing tall in coordinated outfits like it was the most normal thing in the world. We don't know what they felt off stage, if they were proud, ashamed, or just surviving. Their story lives only in faded photos and dusty programs. But even without the details, their presence said plenty, that even in a world of judgment, they stayed together, visible and unashamed. Number 3, Captain George Augur. George Augur didn't just stand out, he filled entire doorways. By 18, he was already over 7 feet tall. Born in Cardiff, Wales, he joined the Royal Marines by lying about his age, but the uniform didn't last. Performance did. In America, Barnum renamed him the Cardiff Giant and dressed him in a tailored suit with medals and a military air. George didn't mind. He had presence. He later wrote a play, married a dancer, and made the circus his home. Fans knew his name. He even applied for U.S. citizenship. But life was never small, not even in death. On Thanksgiving Day in 1922, he collapsed after dinner. Getting his body out of the second-story apartment required ropes and a pulley system while his dog barked downstairs. He was buried in an unmarked grave, but his name kept circling in Sideshow history. Some said he was knighted by Queen Victoria. Maybe that part's a myth. But the dignity? That part was always real. Number 2, Damu Dotree. There was a stillness in Damu Dotree that even lions seemed to trust. He didn't crack whips or shout. He didn't need to. The animals listened. Raised in Pune, he began as a quiet acrobat, but it was the lion's cage that pulled at him. By 13, he was already working with tigers, slowly earning their trust, never forcing fear. His gift took him to Paris with famed trainer Alfred Court, and later to the U.S., where he dazzled crowds for Ringling Brothers as Prince Damu. His performances blended elegance with control. He didn't dominate animals, he moved with them. During World War II, he served in the U.S. Army, offering lectures on animal behavior and performing for troops. Years later, illness brought him back to India, where he lived far from the spotlight. Damu wasn't a man who tamed wild beasts. He was someone they respected. That unspoken connection, the silent trust. It's what made his presence unforgettable. Let's end this with Number 1, Major and Fanny Berdett. Major and Fanny Berdett weren't loud. They didn't have gimmicks. They were twins, small in stature, soft in manner, and that was enough for the circus world to take interest. Born sometime in the late 1800s, they performed together on the sideshow circuit, labeled with words they never chose: midgets, dwarves, little wonders. None of it captured who they actually were. There are no long interviews, no detailed programs, just glimpses, old show listings and faded names on posters. Their act wasn't about tricks, it was about presence. They stood side by side, sometimes dressed in matching outfits, sometimes in ornate costumes crafted to exaggerate their scale. They didn't need to speak much. Their image did the work. But behind every smiling pitch card was a quiet truth. People watched them because they were different. That was their job. That was their life. Today, the paper trail is thin, but the Berdett twins made their mark, not through noise, but through quiet resilience. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you soon in the next one.